Everybody. Oh, I didn't realise I still had notes in this presentation, but I have paper. I'm going to run ever so slightly over time, so I'm not going to probably have time for questions from the room, but you can still talk to me on Twitter or absolutely catch me in the bar later, that's no problem. So the first time that I tried modern VR was at Rezzed a couple of years ago, and we tried the Vive and the PlayStation VR. And my partner at the time and I came home and immediately said, let's ditch the summer holiday, let's buy a Vive, and we did. So most recently I've just started my own VR company, and hopefully you got the chance to play my demo a little bit earlier today, which was ably demonstrated by the lovely Glenn, and it was a kitten game, which sounds super frivolous, and it is, it's lovely, but it also has actually really good mental health applications and end-of-life care applications. I'm really passionate about it. Totally ask me about that later. We don't have super amounts of time, so let's move on. I'm giving up some street cred with Johnny Mnemonic, who was going to be here, for Jessica Fletcher, because she's funnier. There was a Murder, She Wrote VR episode, who knew? Now you all do. So not everyone has tried VR already, so we're going to just do a really quick run through. These are some of the headsets that are available. So the ones along the bottom are all ones that you can put your mobile phone into and try some of the lower res VR experiences. The ones along the top are ones that you can plug into your PC or your PlayStation, and they are some of the really more interactive and higher res stuff. So VR is not all just about games, though that's very much my angle because I started in a game dev network and I'm very involved in the games community. But there are also 360 video experiences and a lot of social and multiplayer VR stuff's coming online now. So we're going to go through really quickly some of the VR stuff that's out there to give you an idea. So this is the Audi VR experience. This is a tour of a concentration camp. So in 360 video, this guy is a survivor and his parents and sister were killed there. So it's pretty emotive. This is a BBC documentary talk show called No Small Talk. So you actually sit at the table in VR during the talk show. It's really kind of weirdly intimate experience. This is the IKEA kitchen simulator. So you can change up all of the cupboard designs and the worktops and the colour of everything. You can open the drawers and there's pots and pans in there. You can actually cook meatballs on the stove. It's kind of bizarre but good fun, and it actually showcases the IKEA products. This is an MOD training simulator from a company called BMT Reality. This is the Eve Gunjack game. Now pay particular attention to the outside edges of this, which is the cockpit, because although the game moves around a lot, the cockpit never moves, so that helps you not to feel sick. This is the Rick and Morty game. It's really good fun. This is the Blue underwater experience. Now it's not very interactive, but this was the Vive launch experience. It's quite short, but it's really pretty and quite immersive. This is the Oculus launch experience by Story Studio. This is Henry, and it's his birthday, but he has no friends because everybody he hugs gets hurt. And this is Facebook Spaces, which is only recently launched. So you and up to 4 Facebook friends, if you have 4 Facebook friends that have VR, can all join in on a VR experience together all at once. So there's a lot of money in VR at the minute. Digital Capital reported that VCs and corporate investors poured $2.3 billion into VR and AR startups last year, which is over 3 times the amount in 2015. So it's a really good burgeoning industry. We're going to talk a lot about immersion. Now we do a lot of immersive experiences even in web design. You know, you want your person who's buying shoes to not really think about the checkout experience and all of their paying. You want them to go from shoes to arriving in the post without thinking too much about it. VR is kind of the same thing, except that you're completely embodied in the experience rather than just observing it. And that leads to a feeling of really immense vulnerability, but also can give the ability to have tremendous participation. So the thing that you need to remember about your VR user is they're completely at your mercy. And it's why user experience within VR is so important. So there's 2 types of user experience design really in VR. There's the nuts and bolts parts that we can affect more as developers. And then there's the storytelling stuff that we design into the experience. And they're both pretty linked together because of the way that VR works. So we're going to talk about user comfort. There's two types, physical and psychological. And the big one is simulator sickness. And I could stand here and have a whole talk just about simulator sickness. So it's defined as the difference between the movement of your real life body and the movement of your VR body, like car sickness, where your eyes tell you you're doing one thing, but your body tells you you're doing something else. So like car sickness or roller coaster sickness. And the reason that it's so important right now is that your VR experience, so few people have tried it, but your VR experience could be the only VR experience that anyone's ever tried. So you're essentially representing the entire VR industry by your one experience. And if you screw that up and you make someone sick, they might not try VR for months, for years, or ever again. So if you screw it up for the rest of us, we're going to hunt you down. So we really need to work hard to prevent sim sickness. And there are a bunch of things we can do. So we need to make everything as smooth as silk. We need really high frame rates. So the Vive and the Oculus particularly are operating at 90 frames per second. So your frame rate needs to be at least that high, preferably higher. We need no latency. Once you drop below that, you're going to start to get juddering and dropped frames. We need no shuddering graphics. We need no camera movement. And in order to do that, while you're developing, you need to be constantly profiling what you're doing. So constantly profiling your GPU and CPU. Now, I don't work an awful lot with Unreal, but I would work more in Unity, but they both have profiling abilities. So in Unreal, you can open the performance profiler and look at your assets. And in Unity, the game screen has a little stats tab, and you can do the same thing. Hopefully you're developing with a friend, and what you want to do is put someone in the HMD, that's the headset, the head-mounted device, and then the other one of you needs to be looking at the profiler, and you need to be checking that everything's going okay. Some assets are just going to be too expensive to use in VR. You can use your normal optimization techniques. You might just need to take it a stage further. You need to be thinking about not using dynamic lighting, not using expensive shaders, not really using smoke effects. There are lots of things that you can do to fudge these things. There's lots of really great resources. Unity and Unreal and Steam and the community forums all have great resources to help you to fool these kind of things and make it look like you've got great effects, even when you haven't necessarily put the really expensive stuff in. So it's really worth going online and looking up the resources that are already there and just Googling stuff. Another thing that really leads to a lot of sim sickness is movement and acceleration. So you have to remember now that the user is your camera. So you don't have the control over the game camera that you used to. We really want no acceleration whatsoever. We want predictable constant speed if you have to have anything, and it needs to be normal human walking speed, which is about 1.4 meters per second. You want to be able to design your game environments or your VR environments to minimize any need for strafing, moving backwards or turning around, because those are not comfortable things to be forced into doing in VR. You want the player movements to be voluntary wherever possible. You want to give your players the ability to use teleport if you can, and not have to use controlled movements on the controllers. And you absolutely must never, ever move the player without their say-so. All the movement in your VR experiences should be player-initiated. When it comes to turning, any kind of rotational acceleration feels really gross. When you think about the way that ballerinas dance, they do that funny movement with their head where they snap their head when they're doing the turns. And we're looking at doing that in VR, where if you make all your turns snap turns, it seems really counterintuitive, but it feels much better. So if you're adding turn movements, if you make them snap turns, it works out much better and gets rid of sim sickness. So if you really have to have some kind of movement, what you want to do is build some kind of construct. And that's why the Eve Gunjack example was good. So you're in a spaceship, but you have a construct which stays steady all the time. So even though your spaceship is moving around quite a lot, you have this still construct. So if you need to move the player, have them climb into a golf cart or climb onto some kind of apparatus, which means that that thing stays still in their vision for the whole time, and that helps them to get over the sickness feeling. Now occasionally you'll build a kind of wall where sometimes the player ends up being pushed by some kind of collision or clipping into walls or clipping into other objects, and sometimes that's unavoidable. Now if you find that happening a lot in your game, the way to get around that is to fade to black, because if clipping occurs and you have to transform the player to another location to get them out of the clipped object, they're going to experience a lot of flickering and a lot of weirdness, and that is really, really sick making. If you just fade to black, do the transform, and then fade them back into the game, fixes the problem. Unfortunately, it just happens sometimes. And then as well as that, when you think about it, when we're normally playing games or looking at videos, we have a small screen in front of us, or sometimes a large screen, but it only takes up a certain percentage of our vision. And in VR, we've got screens strapped to our face. It's 100% of our vision, and it's a lot brighter. So in VR, when we're developing, you need to turn down the brightness of everything. You can afford to make everything a little bit dimmer. That also reduces the flickering, and that will reduce the sim sickness slightly too. A secondary thing to all of the sim sickness discussion is epilepsy. So people who are slightly prone to seizures, people who may not even yet know that they're slightly prone to seizures, are going to have difficulties with all of these things. You've got brightness and flickering, and it might be strapped to your face. So we need to be kind to our users and not cause them to have seizures. Apart from just being a thing that's ethical to do, it's a PR disaster if your game is causing lots of people to have seizures. That's not a thing that you want to be dealing with. And this plays into testing as well, where you are going to, because you're a decent developer and you're going to be continuously testing your content, and you're going to be continuously testing your content in VR, because oh my goodness, things that look fine in the editor look ridiculous in VR. Talking to me in the bar later this week has been bizarre. You are going to get used to the way that your content is, and you're going to get used to your HMD, and you're going to get used slightly to the sim sickness without even realizing it's happening. So having diverse testers and having people that you hardly know come in and test your content is so important in VR development, because of the fact that you get used to all these things. You are like the worst test subject available. A really good example of this is the Resident Evil 7 demo. So Resident Evil is a massive game franchise. It's a massive movie franchise. These guys have loads of money and loads of experience. How could they possibly go wrong? And they released the Resident Evil 7 VR demo at E3 last year. And Kotaku ran with the headline, "Resident Evil 7 in VR is a nauseating mess," because basically everybody that tried it came out feeling sick as a dog. It got absolutely slammed by everybody that tried it. It just was really, really bad, and these guys had no excuse because they had all of the resources available to them. So it's a really, really easy one to mess up. So I'm going to show a video. Google Earth is a pretty early demo of VR that's really swoopy and has a lot of movement. Now, technically it has a comfort mode, and what the comfort mode does is sort of blurs out the edges of your vision and gives you tunnel vision, and it helps because it kind of distances you from the experience and makes it less, you just don't notice the movement as much. It still makes me feel a bit sick. And the second problem with Google Earth is that it starts you in the experience outside of the planet, and I'm scared of heights. So I was always going to try Google Earth because it's a really important VR experience. But let's just say when we tried it in our house, there was a lot of screaming. But it'll give you an idea, hopefully, of how kind of weird it is. Oh, there's no bar coming up. Oh, there's always a Playbar before. Oh, it's going to work anyway, that's all right. find even the video quite swooshy, but when that's strapped to your face, that's like, whoa. Right, okay, so other player comfort things, field of view. So field of view is important when you're developing, just from a matter of thinking about where you're putting things in the world. Whenever you put things too close, your eyes converge, so people can't see things if you put them too close to the player. So you're looking for all of your objects in the game world to be at least arm's length away. And within the player's field of view, now left to right's not so important in VR because obviously your player can turn completely around. But whenever you're thinking up and down, a lot of the VR headsets are still relatively heavy, especially the Vive. So it might seem fun to put things in odd places, but if you do that too much in your VR experience, you're going to give your player neck strain, and that applies to things that are on the ground all the time, or if you put things way up in the sky a lot. Especially if your VR experience, whether it's a video or a game, is very long. You also want to be thinking about the zones for where your objects are. So I would suggest that 2 or 3 meters is your content zone, and up to 10 meters is probably where you want all of your best 3D work. You also need to remember that all of your assets need to be reasonably good from multiple angles now, because the player can walk around the place and see them from multiple angles. So anything from sort of 10 to 20 meters, you should probably be considering the background. So you can have less good 3D there, unless obviously the player is going to be able to walk over in that direction and on into that. And that's really for things that are just for curiosity or just for a sense of security and comfort. If you're going to have crosshairs or reticules, whether it's for being able to target with gaze or being able to target to shoot things, those need to not float in the middle distance. They need to be right back wherever the object is. Because if you have them float in the middle distance but the object's further away, you have difficulty knowing where to focus your eye. Menus. This is a real pet peeve of mine. So in a normal game, if you have a pulse rifle and you need an ammo readout, you put the ammo readout on the screen. Where do you put it in VR? So in VR, the ammo readout goes on the gun because the gun's in your hand. So that's just an immersion issue. If you put the ammo readout somewhere else, it doesn't feel real anymore. Job Simulator is a great VR game, an award-winning VR game that did this really well. When they first launched, they had some complaints that some of the objects were too high up for people to reach. I don't know if they were people or children or just short people, I don't know. So they worked out that they needed a shorter people mode. And they were like, well, we don't really have any menus, so how are we going to implement this? We need to implement it in VR somehow. And the solution that they came up with was at the start of the game, they have this pedestal thing. And in the pedestal, they made a door. And inside the door, they put a big giant lever that you push down that activates shorter human mode. And it's just such a lovely thing, and it's a joy to use, and it has haptic feedback, and it means that it's part of the game. It's not a stupid menu that you have to activate from somewhere, and it's not a thing you have to read. It's just part of the whole game, and it's a proper VR thing, so you haven't broken immersion in order to use it. Call of the Starseed is another amazing adventure game in VR, and they needed an inventory. And inventory is normally multiple objects, and in a PC game that would be a big long scrolly list of stuff. So that was a real challenge for them, and they had a beautiful implementation of that as well, because an inventory often in a game is in a backpack, and so they figured, well, we'll just make it a backpack. So in VR, to get to your inventory in their game, you reach over your back and you lift over a backpack, and then you just look through the backpack for the thing that you need and you pick it out. And it's beautiful. It's really, really a joy to use. And that means that immersion's not broken. They didn't need a stupid menu. You just have a backpack, and when you're finished with it, you put it back in your back. It's lovely. If you really desperately need a menu, then the back of your hand or something is a lovely place because it's on the player. Doesn't get in the way of the world or anything else. A few games have put them down on the floor or somewhere near your foot because Again, it doesn't get in the way of anything. I would encourage you though, if you can, find a way to avoid using menus, because think about the way that you interact with the real world. We don't really have very many menus in real life. Things not to do, let's not have Iron Man face menus. That's not normal, no one wants that. Let's not have Minority Report. Unless your VR experience is like 60 seconds long, nobody wants tired arms. Lots of people have contextual things, so things that interact with the world, maybe through gaze. So you can do gaze tracking with where people are looking with the headset, and that's quite nice. That's quite enjoyable for depending what you've done previously in the experience. Things change depending on what you're looking at. The only thing is, too much gaze tracking starts to make your users a bit shy about where they're going to look in case they trigger something accidentally. So you need to just be a little bit careful about that. And the other thing is, all of these interactions, you're the worst test subject. I'm going to say that a lot. Because you quickly get used to exactly how your menus work, exactly how all your interactions work, and exactly where all the things are in your world that you need people to interact with. So you constantly need a lovely stream of fresh new users that have never used your content before to come and test it, and you need to keep notes, and you need to watch how people use things, and you just constantly need new testers. We need some kind of a resource for testers in VR, really we do. Okay, text and subtitles. So fundamentally in VR, there is no way to sit closer to the screen. Text is really tough to use. It's hard to read in VR. Height of the user comes into it. If your text is too low down, how are the people who are tall going to read it? Are they going to stoop down? Or are the short people going to read the high up text? How are you going to deal with that? If they miss the text, do people need an audio summary if they can't quite read it? Are you going to have a way for them to repeat that audio summary? What do you do if you have audio in your game and you need subtitles? What are you going to attach the subtitles to? You can't attach them to the user because then it's not obvious what there are subtitles for. If you attach them to the object, how do you make sure that the user's looking in the right place? There's just lots of really complicated problems with text in VR, and I don't necessarily have all the answers. I'm not sure anyone does. It's probably on a per project basis, and there's probably always going to be compromises. You can have prompts for people to move closer to things. That might help. People have suggested having narrator robots or little helpers that will, ease you over into certain areas of the game to help you to come and look at things. Though I always like to invite people to remember the Microsoft paperclip at this point. Looks like you're trying to talk to this NPC. Would you like some help? So you need to think carefully about what suits your project, and you need to be careful that it doesn't end up really weird. And you need to test it with actual users to make sure that it doesn't end up really weird and it's not just you that thinks it's brilliant. Input methods. So there are input methods in VR for some of the controllers. Some of them are great and have lots of buttons, some of them don't have so many. But the problem is that nobody can see them because everybody has a thing strapped to their face. So there can be a lot of anxiety associated with if you have too many buttons and you've activated too many things and you expect people to remember what all the buttons are. Especially in multiplayer social spaces, if you give people too many buttons to remember. You also need to remember that the HMD is a user interface, so you can give people gestures to do stuff. That works. Let's talk about psychological problems. So there's lots of psychological discomfort that you can cause your user that you just have to avoid, and you can avoid it just by being aware of it. Don't put people on ledges or heights because all they will focus on is the height. Don't put people underwater. They'll feel like they're suffocating even though they aren't. Or you can do both those things if you want, but like if you were doing that in real life, you'd warn somebody first. Just do that in VR, that's all right. Space is an issue. So if you feel like you're standing on a stable floor, but your horizon in VR is wobbling, you'll feel sick really quickly. So keep the horizon stable. If you put people in small, tiny, claustrophobic spaces, they'll quickly feel panicky. Don't do that. Conversely, actually, when you put people in really wide, open spaces with no trees in the background or mountains or anything, they quickly actually feel really uneasy. So just put some background in there. If you put people in a place with no ground plane at all, that's just cruel and unusual. Why would you do that? Put a ground plane in, for God's sake. Also, within your game or experience or 360 video, if you put display the area bounds of your play space, if it's room scale, that can make people actually feel quite relaxed and like they know where the boundaries are and they're not going to accidentally bump into anything. And that can help them relax into it and feel more immersed. And you can do that in ways that are good for your game or whatever you're doing. So, you know, you can make them runes or little blades of grass. You know, it doesn't have to be really breaking. Good sound design in VR is really nice and really important. It can actually make people feel really safe and really oriented in a way that actually great graphics can't. So it can help them feel much more at home in your experience. And haptic sound feedback is really helpful too. Like when people interact with your environment, just giving them a little bit of sound feedback can actually make them feel like, oh, well, I know that was a success. So just adding those little touches can actually make a big difference to how successful your experience feels. So, no sudden scene changes makes a big difference too. If you allow people to open a door, view a scene, and then fade them into that scene, rather than just going boom and dumping them into it, makes a huge difference and it's much kinder. And if you're teleporting, if you allow people to see the area they're traveling to with the teleport before you actually just dump them there, that's also much more, it's much less jarring than just dumping people into places. On the launch of your experience, if you can launch them in the orientation of whatever it is you're doing, that really helps. Like if you've got a welcome pedestal or you've got like a menu or something, launch facing it, you know. Don't make them turn around to find the entrance, unless you want them to start feeling confused. And if that's what you're going for, then fair enough. So the Oculus guide starts with, be aware that your user has an unprecedented level of immersion, and frightening or shocking content can have a profound effect on users, particularly sensitive stuff, in a way that past media could not. Shock and jump scares are great if that's what you're going for, but just remember to warn people, because you can't always tell if people have medical conditions, and you can't always tell how sensitive people are. We have an entire film industry with a rating system for a reason, so that people can go, that's a horror film, I'm not watching it. So just, you know, if you have shock and jump scares in your game, remember to just let people know. Right, and in your face. So things in real life, when they're right in your face, are not that comfortable. If there's a bug flying in your face, or even a person too close to you, you tend to bat them away. And it's no different in VR. So we have the comfort bubble in your face or on other parts of your body, which just means that when content that's flying around in VR or in social spaces, people get too close, we have an invisibility bubble that makes the content invisible when they get too close. And that just makes the whole experience slightly more comfortable for people. Once again, you're the worst test subject for all of this stuff, so try to get in other people. Finally, for this section, VR fatigue. So we know that if you have a longer experience physically, you can start to feel tired, but we're talking more about emotional fatigue here. So if you have a 360 video documentary about the Syrian refugee crisis, when you're feeling fully immersed in that, you're going to very quickly feel like you're in a constant state of empathy, and you're constantly going to be thinking about the environment. And we'll say the Resident Evil game, you're going to be in a constant state of alertness and constantly wondering where the next zombie's coming from, what are you going to do about it. So it's really important to build into your experience, particularly longer ones, lulls in the action and safe harbour spaces, so that your users can pause if they want to. So in the Syrian refugee thing, that might be just, a break room or the kids playing football. Obviously in Resident Evil, it's going to be like an office where you can read some diary entries and find some health packs, but you just need to give people a chance to calm down and sit for a while as long as they want to, and just give them a chance to take a break. Again, for this particular thing, you're the worst test subject. I even have a slide for it. Because you very quickly, because you're continually testing your experience, you become inured to all of that content, and it doesn't seem as frightening to you, or it doesn't seem as emotionally exhausting to you. And you need to remember that that's not the case for other people, so you need to be continually bringing in new testers. So, oh gosh, we're rushing out of time here. Right, finishing up. Interpersonal differences in VR are a real problem. They're a play in VR in a way that they're not a factor in other mediums. Who even are you in VR? Are you Mr. Tiffin the Squirrel King? Are you a hairy Canadian lumberjack? Do you even want to be yourself in VR? Lots of people use VR and they don't want to be themselves. So if I am in a game or a VR experience, and if I'm in a normal game on a normal screen and I have a character and they don't have my normal hands, I feel fine about that. It's not my hands. I might have some kind of an issue with it, but it doesn't break my immersion in the game. In VR, it does, because every time I look down, it feels like my body, but they're not my normal hands. They're like a man's hands or a goblin's hands or something else, but it's my body. So it's really jarring when you look down and they feel like they should be yours, but they're not. So different gender, different skin colour, different age is enough to be going, whoa. Not everyone even has 2 hands and 10 working digits, so it can be really jarring. So you can overcome that by giving people a choice. And that also increases their investment in the experience, and also increases their immersion then. But maybe you can't afford, as a small studio, to give people a choice, in which case, do you know what? Just put gloves on the hands. That can be enough. But even then, having no body available is better than having the wrong body, because you don't want to be breaking immersion all the time. Height is another really big deal in VR, because your users are the camera now. And like, I have an escape the room game at home where there are things that I can't reach on one shelf because I'm too small, but my partner could. So he can see the things on the shelf and he knows what the clues are and he can lift them down. But I can technically lift them down, but I can't see them. So until I knew they were there, I couldn't break the game. Anyway, so you have to think about all of your users are at different heights and what are you going to do about that. Also, height changes vulnerability in games. So there's a game called Abbott's Book. And my partner at the time played it. It's a sort of horror game, but this was just the little demo. And before the demo even started, you had to log in, you met this monk, and you walked down this path in a graveyard just to get into the church part, which was the start of the demo. And so he logged in, he's looking at the guy in the eye, and they walk down the little graveyard path and into the church, and the demo starts, blah, 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 blah. And I log in, and it's a graveyard, and it's dark, and there's creepy noises, and I'm not looking the guy in the eye. I'm like this, the guy's looming over me, and I feel really scared because, and this is not just a height issue, this is also because I'm a woman. So he's looming over me, he's an unknown male, it's dark, I'm in a graveyard, and everything about my experience as a woman is screaming at me, you should run the hell away from here. This is really, really unsafe. And that's just an odd gender difference, that I've been brought up differently because of my gender to feel like that's super unsafe. Now, it's kind of neither here nor there in many ways, but there's a difference in feel to that because of gender. And you just have to be aware of that. And you have to be doing it intentionally, or you at least have to. It took an experience which was meant to be mildly creepy and made it really, really frightening. So there's lots of user differences that if that had been a normal game for me, I would have just clicked on, oh, some monk, I'll just wander down this path with him. I wouldn't have thought twice about it. So there's a difference in vulnerability with height. There's a difference in being able to reach things. You just need to make sure what you're doing is intentional. Right, so you're the worst test subject, because if you're literally the only test subject, you can't test for things like that. You have to test with women, you have to test with people of different heights, you have to test with people of different experience. Here we go, right. The final thing is 2 videos. Okay, so I don't have time to do the storytelling part of the talk, so I'm not doing the storytelling part of the talk. Skipping through this. So there's 2 videos, right? The first video is called Broken Night. It's from the Tribeca Film Festival, and it's an 8-minute VR experience. So there's 2 things to think about in this. The first one is it's a really nice use of the gaze technique, because the gaze technique is what makes your user choices in this film. But it's a really, really good use of tension, and a really sort of frightening use of tension, because you're not just witnessing violence in this. This is a VR experience, so they're essentially putting you into a really violent situation. It's only an 8-minute experience, so I suppose it's okay. Do you come out of this with slight trauma? I don't know. Have they created a safe space because they've put it interspersed with a guy at a desk who's asking you questions? I'll let you make your own minds up. Or maybe I'll just skip the slide entirely because I'm so clumsy. There we go.
See, here's the thing. I don't have anyone else's prints on that gun.
That doesn't make any sense.
Just tell me what happened.
I think he took the gun.
Just tell me what happened.
He took the... No.
Dan, get down here now! Don't be in here! Call the fucking police! Shut up! Shut up! Hey, shut up!
Simone, I can help you.
I want to speak to a lawyer.
I'm really looking forward to trying that. But I think it looks quite tense. Right, so the second video, which is the last one, is called We Wait, and it's a collaboration between BBC and Aardman, who did Wallace and Gromit as well. But it's about a terrified Syrian family on a boat from Turkey to Greece with smugglers. So the 2 things about this video are the way they've used the lighting has created a lot of tension. So you're on the boat with them. But also when you look at them, they look back at you and they react to you, and that's what makes you feel like you're really there and like you're part of the whole experience. And even sort of subtly, that gives you a sense of really being there. And Dan from Aardman at VR World Congress said, your sense of politeness makes you feel like you have to continue the journey with them, which I thought was kind of funny.
They were supposed to be here an hour ago.
Maybe they don't come.
Right, so there's new comfort issues with VR. There's far greater interpersonal differences than there is in any other medium. There's new storytelling challenges, which we haven't got time to talk about, sorry. So the best things that you can do are stay up to date, both you and your software. Use things like VR tools and Steam VR because they're constantly updated. VR Toolkit has a complete Slack channel with people constantly on it, helping you to use it and making great new changes. Talk to me on Twitter if you want to know any more about that. There are no experts here yet, really. Everybody's just fumbling through, doing the best that they can. Testing is absolutely key, continuously throughout your project, and as diversely as possible throughout your project. And absolutely 100% test in VR. Don't think that you can test in your editor and assume that everything is okay. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm sorry I went over. You're the worst test editor.